Okay, so this is segment 2 of the training on culture, race, and ethics in social work. I just finished speaking with you in segment 1 about culture. We talked about the definition of culture. We talked about the different groupings as to how culture is formed, whether that be worldviews or beliefs or political parties. We talked about subcultures and how people identify their culture, whether it be the general culture that they come from or whether it be a subculture within their culture. In this segment 2, we are going to delve a little more into the topic of race. As most of you know, the definition of race is distinct physical or general genetic characteristics of a shared group. When we think of race and when we think of what makes people different physically, there are a couple things that come to mind. The most general racial characteristic that we look at, or feature that we look at, of course, is skin color. Skin color is going to vary greatly depending on where you're at in the world. South Americans have a very nice caramel, beautiful skin. Africans have the gorgeous black, darker skin. And then even within Asia and Eurasia, you have the differing skin tones. I know even within Asia, a lot of times you can tell which Asian country specifically a child is from based on the skin tone. So you have these differing features within skin tone. You also have hair type. Hair types can vary greatly from one race to another. A lady told me the other day she was from China, and she told me she could tell that my little boy was from Taiwan because his hair type and what his hair was like. So hair type is another one. You also have facial features, which can vary greatly from one race to another. So different races have these different features, which is how we identify the different races that people come from. Within a race, you can have differing, varying features. For instance, like I was just saying, Asia, when you mark on a sheet, say it asks you what race you are, it just says Asian. But we all know that within the Asian race, there are many different types as well. You have Taiwanese, Japanese, Filipino, Chinese, Korean. You have all of these different races within what we would classify as the greater race of Asian. Even within one particular race, things can vary greatly. I know my grandparents used to be missionaries in the former USSR. They were missionaries in Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan. And one of the things that we noticed is that even within this country and even within the Uzbek people, that you had individuals that would look very Asian, and then you had individuals that would look very much more Eastern European and Russian. And so even within this small country that is not that big, you have varying degrees of physical features. One important thing to note is that it's important not to assume when it comes to race. That's how a lot of people get themselves in trouble, by assuming the race of a certain person. I remember a couple months ago we were out somewhere, and Silas had pushed another little kid out of the way to get in line first, and I was about to go correct him, and another mother huffed about my son and said, "That Chinese boy." And you better believe that the mama bear in me came out just a little of it when that happened. But again, there's that, just that ignorant statement of assuming what my son's race was. So we need to be cautious with that. It's important to remember that race is a biological factor, while culture is a social factor. One cannot change their race, but culture can change, and as we see in American culture, does change frequently. Some of the race issues that our adopted children and adopted families will face include some of the following. The first, they might come across judgment based on the color of their skin. And this can vary even within skin tone. We used to have a girl in our youth group who was a lighter skinned African American, and she would get teased and made fun of by the African American girls that had darker skin tone because her skin was so light. So you can definitely have judgments made based on skin tone. Along going into this can also include identification by skin color. For instance, rather than saying that child who is black or who is African American, you have some people that say that black child. And it's not ethically correct, politically correct to say that black child or that Asian child. It's politically correct and appropriate to say that child that is black or that child that is Asian. I once was having a conversation with somebody and they were talking about a mall riot that had happened, and they used the term a bunch of black kids when describing who was responsible for the mall riot. And I, of course, immediately stopped them and said, why did you have to point out that they were black? If it had been a group of white kids, would you have said a bunch of white kids? And no, they wouldn't have, because that's not how they identify Caucasian children, but they were identifying those children as black children. So it's important not to identify based on skin color, but it just to being an underlying factor of who that person is. Another issue, racial issue that a lot of our children face and adoptive families face is stereotypes. And we definitely see the exaggeration of stereotypes. And sometimes it's done in humor and jest, and sometimes it can be done in harmful ways. I know my family enjoys watching the show Fresh Off the Boat about a Taiwanese family that moves to America back in the 1990s, and they're in Orlando, and the show completely takes Asian stereotypes and just exacerbates them and exaggerates them so that for the humor and to make it look funny. And you know, the mom is, you know, your typical Asian mother who you know wants her kids to be perfect and get perfect grades, and who wants her family to look a certain way, and they take that and they just make it so much bigger of an issue to make it funny for the show. So we see this done in jest sometimes, but then we also see it done in ways that are damaging, and ways that we need to be cautious of and we need to be sensitive to. For instance, you don't assume that an African American child is going to be good at sports. You don't assume that an Asian child is going to be highly intelligent. Not to brag about my child, but he is extremely intelligent. Silas is, and maybe it's not so much that he's intelligent, he just has a very good memory. And so he doesn't forget anything that you tell him or anything that he hears. And so people comment all the time about how, of course he's intelligent, he's Asian. And I have to be quick to correct them and point out that he's intelligent because he learns stuff and he reads stuff and he watches these educational videos, and he takes the time to do this. By them saying that he's smart because he's Asian is taking away from his accomplishments and taking away from the work that has gone into him learning that body of information. So we want him to see it as a strength that he's intelligent, and that he has a desire to learn, and we as his parents want to foster that and not just say, oh, of course he's smart because he's Asian. Another issue that a lot of our adopted children and adopted families might have to face is just the history of race-related issues, specifically here within America. You know, right now in America, we are having some racial tension, specifically between the African American community and the police community. And we are seeing these racial tensions and these disparities throughout our nation's history, though, too. We see that there have been times where they have been brought to the forefront, whether it be Civil War times, slavery times, whether it be the 1960s and the Civil Rights Movement. There have been times within our nation's history where racial issues have been brought to the forefront. And so we need to ensure that we are teaching our children about those, that they are aware of those, that they are aware of all of the details and all of the facts, so that they can be well educated and so that they can be well informed about those issues, especially in regards to their own specific race. With the African American culture, of course, our nation has had a great deal of racial tension throughout its history in regards to that. But we've also had tension with the Latina and Hispanic communities. We've also had tension with Asian communities, like during World War II. And so it's important for us to educate our children and educate our families on that. And just talk about why some people might have particular prejudices, particular racial tensions, so that our families can address those appropriately. Many people, actually, I'm going to save this for segment number 3. So we'll stop there for segment 2, and then I'll move on to segment 3. Thanks.